My pleasure to introduce Tyler Bauer. Tyler's an adjunct professor and the associate director of the Cultural Apologetics Certificate Program here at Palm Beach Atlantic University. In addition to his service at PBA, Tyler serves as a headmaster at Pietist Classical Christian School and is a professor of humanities at Christ College, a classical micro college in Melbourne. In his spare time, you can find Tyler writing about classical education, worldview, and philosophy at tylerbauer.com or co-hosting God and Other Small Stuff podcast. Tyler's married to Jennifer and they have one child. Tyler's working on his PhD in philosophy of religion from Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. So please join me in welcoming Tyler Bauer.
Thank you. Well, howdy. If you are here to learn about baking, you're in the wrong room. So, like I said, good to meet you. I am Tyler Bauer, and this morning we're talking about transhumanism. So, I've got a slide, and I'll mention this in a second. Transhumanism is a whole dedicated philosophy of life. So I have the subtitle on here, Is It Another Quest to Be Like God? Transhumanism is a way of imagining reality and human persons in relation to technology. So because it's got the word trans in our current sort of cultural moment, we care about things like transgenderism. This is not the same thing. I'll get to that in a moment. But as we think about transhumanism, we have to think about it as like this is a structured, dedicated worldview. This is a way of imagining all of reality, not merely sort of a pet project to folks. So what is transhumanism? First off, it's not to be confused, like I mentioned, with transgenderism or something like transsexualism. It's not the same movement. The trans word there is not to be confused as being mixed in between the two of them. The movements are related, but they're not the same. So there is a component of change. The prefix trans is to change things. So there is a relation there between in sort of a transgender or a transsexual view. You can change things like your gender or your biological sex. In transhumanism, what would you be changing? Being human. You'd be changing what it means to be an actual ontological human sort of thing. So there's a relation there in that both sort of sets of worldviews or both sort of ideas are about changing what you are. This is a deeper level, though. This is about changing, again, what it means for you as the thing that's a human. You're changing that, whatever that property is. Transgenderism and transsexualism have to do with altering aspects of your identity. So what you identify as. We talk a lot about right now about I identify as this or my identity is what have you. Transhumanism is not really concerned about your identity. They don't really care what you identify as, what you think about yourself as. They're going to be concerned with what kind of thing are you. So to give an example of this, transhumanism is going to not ask the question, I'll use a horse. You might be a trans animalist and say, I identify as a horse. I guess maybe the more popular one would be cats. There are actually people there who imagine themselves as being cats. I identify as a cat. Be trans-animalism. Transhumanism isn't worried about that. They're saying, no, I'm not concerned with what you identify as. I'm not concerned that you identify as a cat. Are you a cat? And so a transhumanist wouldn't have a problem with, like, let's say you went and biologically altered yourself to become a cat. Somehow you injected cat DNA and gave yourself cat ears for reals and what have you. They would be comfortable saying you have become ontologically a cat. It's not what you identify as, it's that you are that thing now. So the difference here is identity, personal intuitions, sort of subjective experiences. That's transgenderism or transsexualism or transanimalism or trans whateverism. Transhumanism is about objective realities. What is the thing that you are in relation to the rest of the world? So this is a very objective, external kind of view as opposed to an internal relationary kind of view. Tracking? Okay. Second, we should not confuse this with science fiction. I hear this sometimes when I speak on these kinds of things. It sounds very science fiction-y. When you start talking about like altering your body with cybernetics and uploading your brain to a computer, it sounds like, because it very much is stuff that you find in science fiction novels. I read a ton of sci-fi in high school, and these themes come up all the time of like you plug your brain, or the Matrix. If familiar with the Matrix, you literally plug like the thing into the back of your head, and then that uploads you to a computer world. This is not that. So there is, all of those themes will show up here, but this is not a sort of high schooler, Wachowski brothers sitting around and imagining reality. There are serious attempts to make this happen. So I've got on there, it's not yet an actualizable worldview. You can't actually pull this off. You can't actually do what they want yet. The most famous transhumanist series of books is by a guy named Ray Kurzweil, who The Singularity is Near, and now he has a new book that came out this year called The Singularity is Nearer. Whatever. His whole point, he said back in 2005, he's like, I think this is going to get about to happen in around 2036. This is estimate in 2005. In The Singularity is Nearer, he doesn't give a date, but he's like, I'm not sure when this is going to happen, but it's going to happen any day, where this is going to be a real thing that we can pull off. So how do we know this? I've got the kind of fun, cartoonized version of Elon Musk there, but the one right below Elon Musk's face is a picture of Neuralink, which Elon Musk owns. What do you do with Neuralink? They install, well, that's kind of that's not specifically Neuralink itself, but it's heading in that direction. They install a plate below the skull that transmits electronic signals into the brain right now for the purposes of mostly restoring function. So right now what Neuralink is trying to do is add function back if you've missed sight or there's problems with your mind connecting to your external organs. Trying to restore those kinds of things, but Musk has said on the record that's the first step. We want to eventually be able to do things like download books and information into your brain. So it's not an actualizable worldview yet, but we're on the cusp. And I think Kurzweil's point is we may not be able to just like do all the things, but we're getting closer and closer all the time. You've also got, I think these look really dorky, but the like Apple goggles, Apple lens, whatever they're called. This idea of using a technological framework to alter your reality to enhance your capabilities. So with this kind of technology, right now you can't give someone mechanical or technological eyes that like project things into the world that aren't there and create what's called altered reality. We can't do that quite yet, but you can attach a whole thing to your head that does that, where you like, you know, you'll see it on the commercials or something. You look at your fridge and there's a sort of alternate computerized calendar on your fridge and things like that. The goal is to eventually be able to take these kinds of technologies and make it so that they're not external pieces that you just put on, but they just replace the biological things that are you and become part of you. Tracking? The goal of the transhumanist movement would be able to say, rather than putting a set of goggles on your head, what if we just take out your eyeballs and put in better eyes that do all of these things better? We also see this in the realm of prosthetics. So I've got a note here. I'm not saying that all of this stuff is necessarily bad. So to have someone who's missing a limb, to have that limb's function restored is not necessarily a bad thing. Neither is necessarily using like the Apple structure on your head, because the Apple structure on your head is not that different from the Apple structure that was sitting in my pocket. I can hold this up and have a picture of my, the couch I want or something in my living room. To have these things is not necessarily bad, but what we are looking at is the worldview and the philosophy behind these things. Why are we going in these directions, and what is the ultimate goal? No individual piece is necessarily problematic in and of itself, but what is the goal of the whole picture? So, Prosthetics, these forms of biotech are largely unproblematic in and of themselves. So why should we be concerned? If we've got things that are non-problematic, if we've got non-problematic pieces of technology, if restoring function to a lost leg, or even, like, let's say somebody was blind and we gave them eyeballs that worked, or their ears didn't work, or their brain doesn't work, or their liver doesn't work. If we could repair those things, why would we not do that? If we can do that and not be concerned, why should we be concerned at all? So when we look at transhumanism, it's important to know that there's no singular definition because it's not monolithic. As I'll get into in a moment, it's an incredibly individualized philosophy. So it's not as though I have the transhumanist movement, because we can kind of talk about them in broad strokes, but there's no real orthodoxy. You know, with Christianity, if you deny the Trinity, you're unorthodox. We can say that there's a problem in your sort of generalized structure of Christianity. Transhumanism doesn't have something like that. They have no manifesto. Well, I guess they have a book called the Manifesto, but it's not all of them agree with it. So they have no real manifesto. They have no Bible. They have no all-encompassing set of views. But there are a couple of things that we can say that they share. So one of these is a libertarian anthropology, and that's not to be confused with libertarian political parties. Okay, so whatever you think about the libertarian political party, don't care about them for this purpose. Okay. But what they do say is that human autonomy is a necessary aspect of human nature. So the transhumanist movement will generally look at you and say, you as a thing, as an individual person, have complete radical autonomy. You have the ability to make decisions about everything to do with your physical body. And nothing and no one outside of you can make any decisions whatsoever regarding your body. Which is not, we kind of think about, we might assume that we have this sort of view in something like the United States, but for example, there are things that you can't do. You can't ingest certain substances. It's actually not legal for you to go lop off parts of your body in general structures. Like I'm not sure what anybody would do, but I can't legally lop off my foot. I'm not sure who would stop me, but it's considered a sort of social faux pas, and there are actually things to prevent you. If you are threatening to cut off your foot, somebody can call the police and they can come institutionalize you for wanting to do damage to your body. So we do have laws in our society that say you're not completely autonomous. Okay? In this view, no one has the right to tell another person what to do with their own body in any way, including suicide, including removing your brain, and anything. This would say, in any way whatsoever, no one has the right to tell you anything about what to do with your own body. This leads into a view that's called morphological freedom, and this is the view to alter your body in any way that you see fit. So because no one can tell you what to do with your body, you can do anything you want to your body. It's kind of just the natural extension of this. Anything can be done to a person's body so long as they give their consent and they intend to make the change. So let's say that I give my consent to have my arms removed, but I don't actually intend to do that. Like I give my consent because I'm being coerced for some reason. This view would say, well, that's not okay because you were coerced, and therefore, even though you gave consent, you didn't intend to do such a thing. And then vice versa, if you intend to do a thing but have not given your consent, you also can't do that. So they have a very strong view of like, you have to want to do it, you have to say you want to do it, and therefore, if those are true, you can do it. Also note that the transhumanist view usually assumes addition of a function, not subtraction. So what they would not say is that it makes sense for a person to just cut off their arm. They would say if you're going to do something like that, it's because you're going to attach a new arm that is better than the original. So this is not to be confused with, there are views out there, for example, of people who identify as being paraplegic, or their legs don't work. And so they have functioning healthy legs, but they identify as not having functioning healthy legs, and so they petition to have the use of their legs removed. I don't know, we can talk, that's a different thing. But this is not that. The transhumanist movement would not buy into that idea. They would say, you can have your legs removed, but it's going to be probably because you're going to have new, cool robotic legs installed because they're better than the original, is the thought. So addition of function, not subtraction of function. Okay, they also have what we might call an anthropological physicalism or materialism. If you want to be really nerdy about philosophy, there's actually a distinction between physicalism and materialism, but only like the most subset of nerds are going to get into that space. So for our purposes, we don't care about it. We're going to consider these to be the same thing. They're going to say humans only physical. You don't have a soul. That's basically what this is saying. You're electrochemical compositions of things, what Dr. Barnes was just talking about. You're just the physics all put together into one thing, and that's you. So you're the composite of particles and stuff, and it's all come together, and that makes you you. Okay? Because there is no soul, you're just the sum total of your body. So there's no identifying component to you other than your physical stuff. This leads into what they call the view of functionalism, which is that your human parts, whatever they are, particularly the mind, are best described by the function they perform. So your mind is what it is because of what it does, not because of what it is internally. And if the function of a part changes, the part itself changes. Parts are only describable by the thing that they perform, by the function that they perform. Patternism is their view of mind. So it's a kind of functionalism that says a human is individuated by your unique thoughts, patterns of behavior, intentions, what have you. So if you're just a lump of physical matter, if you're just a bunch of cells or particles or space dust or whatever metaphor you want to use, if you're just that, then how do I differentiate you from any other thing? Because if I were to look at you at sort of an analytic level, your space dust would look more or less the same as anybody else's space dust. So what makes you you? They're going to say, well, ultimately what makes you you is the function of your mind, your thoughts. You think unique things, you have particular patterns of behavior, you have intentions, you have memories, what have you. If you want to know someone's pattern of behavior, you can ask their spouse, what are they really like? And they could probably tell you, well, they do this and they do that, and they're kind of weird over here, but they do this thing. And patternism would say those things are the way that I individuate you as a unique human thing, as a unique thing. Okay? A hugely important component here is evolution through technology. So humans will eventually move beyond human nature into a new kind of being, the post-human, which is currently defined as question mark. No one really knows what the post-human is. But the goal of the transhumanist movement is not just the change. It's the goal of being more than human. And how are we going to do this? By eventually using enough technology to become more than human, such that there is now a new species of thing. So the ultimate goal, probably none of us, we're all going to die before such a thing would occur, but the ultimate goal would to say we want to force the next stage in human evolution by creating a new kind of thing that was once human, but is no longer. Human-computer similarity, part of the way they're able to pull this off is because they say basically, because your physical stuff, your electronics happening in a brain, you're basically an organic computer. If we were to really boil you down, your brain just performs mathematical, algorithmic functions like a computer does. You're basically the same thing as a computer. And the singularity that Ray Kurzweil talks about is when AI, when computer technology reaches the intelligence of humans and is indistinguishable from humans. When that moment happens and AI and humans are kind of on the same playing field, we have this new world that's open to us because we have now reached a point in which humans and computers can transfer between each other because they're the same. They're indistinguishable. Okay? This leads into their component of mind uploading. Eventually, humans will be able to upload their minds into computers, which allows you to be able to sort of store yourself for later downloading. So I can remember growing up in the 90s, there were all of these stories about people wanting to like freeze themselves so that in the future they could be unfrozen and then they could continue to live because of the new technology. And transhumanism goes, why would you need to do that? We can just upload your mind and store it in a hard drive somewhere, and then when we have a new body, we don't need your old body. Plus, if you have a body that was frozen, chances are, I'm not sure if you know this, but you're probably aware that like your body has problems with it. I get heartburn and my knees hurt and things like that. So I imagine if I freeze this body, when I unfreeze it, those problems will still be there, which is, not great. I don't want those things. But if I can upload my mind into a computer, I can theoretically download that into a body that doesn't have those problems. So they're not worried about the freezing the body thing. The whole goal is if we can upload your mind, eventually we can download that mind into a new, better body. So if you live long enough to get to the mind uploading phase, you can eventually get to this point where you sort of live forever. Because your mind can be uploaded and downloaded 1,000,000 times. It's just saved on a computer like a file. You can create an infinite number of copies of a file. So in sum, transhumanist values are complete individual autonomy. You are made up of your body and identified by your patterns, and further evolution occurs through use of technology. So that's sort of the transhumanist movement. If we were to overly generalize and kind of lump them all into a bucket, that's more or less what the people in this movement think. Okay? So a few political thoughts. Now, a wise person would not bring up politics 2 weeks before a major election. I'm not sure what that says about me, but clearly I don't meet the definition of a wise person. So before I do this, I'm just going to note, I am not talking in any way about any current political figures. Tracking? I just don't care about that for the purposes of this discussion. We're not talking about those things, but we are going to talk about the sort of larger trends. So whatever you think about any individual candidate, just put that away. Whatever you think about a particular political party, just put that away. Okay? We're not worried about those things. Okay? So the transhumanist movement is an ultimate end to a progressive worldview. Okay? I'm not talking about the current Democratic Party platform or however you link Democrats and progressivism or any of those kinds of things. We're not worried about that. Progressivism, though, which is attached to these things in some ways, is a set of worldviews centered around progressing towards a utopian ideal. That's the name of the political philosophy, progressivism. You're progressing towards something. Transhumanism is a movement that provides one solution to the progressive thought process. Tracking? So it is a progressive ideology. Whatever you think about that term, progressivism. Okay? So we need to know that. Transhumanism is a progressive worldview, or a kind of progressive worldview. And therefore it is opposed to what we might call a conservative worldview. So again, not worried about current political platforms. When I say conservatism, I'm talking about a set of worldviews primarily concerned with conserving the great Western tradition, particularly the Christian tradition. So there is an opposition in this movement to a sort of classical Christian understanding of the world. Transhumanism is seeking to create a human, technologically based utopia over and against a Christian anthropology. And this is going to impact how people associated with this movement get into things like politics. Okay? Again, you've got a figure like Elon Musk, who is, ironically enough, sort of working on the right at the moment, but is one of the largest funders of this ideology. Spends millions of dollars into this kind of stuff. He's an avid transhumanist. And he has a somewhat progressive view, even if that progressive view is not the same as the one that we typically think of on the news cycle. It's a kind of progressivism, even if it's not the same one that we think about on our sort of political talk shows. Okay? It departs from a conservative view in a few ways. The anthropology is different. Communally, humans are seen as different things. They don't really, transhumanism, there's no room for human communities. There's just human individuals. Ontologically, humans are self-referentially creative. So in a Christian view of the world, God creates you. Yeah, there's going to be a talk a little bit later today about God's naming of things and naming. So God is the one that gives you purpose and structure. In the transhumanist view of the world, that's not true. You define what it means for you as a thing to be a human. And if that definition is different than someone else's, that's fine. But you get to define what it means to be human in a sort of transhumanist view. So what ethical concerns does this leave us with? Radical individualism. So imagine a society in which every being is purely autonomous, in which no one under any circumstances has the right to tell you what to do with your own self. Now think about that. Someone might punt to the harm principle, which is don't hurt people and don't take their stuff. But if I'm radically autonomous, that means, for example, I get to define what I think harm means. And that might mean that somebody else gets to define what harm means. How do you have a society in which everyone gets to define all of the pieces for themselves? So not that this is an answer to this, but it's a question we ought to ask. If this is really true, if we really go down this road and actualize this sort of worldview, what would a world even look like with a bunch of singular individuals all living in the same space? Every person would be their own society. What would that look like? Okay. Another ethical concern that gets brought up is what we might call discriminatory technologicalism, or technologism, or whatever I called that. Okay. This would literally create a society of haves and have-nots, because I'm not sure if you know this, but technology is expensive. And so imagine a person who can remove parts and make themselves a superior athlete versus someone who can't afford to do so. What would happen to sports? As a kind of mundane example. If you've got people who are technologically advanced versus those who are not. You've got athletes who can afford to do that versus those who can't. And a lot of these technologies wouldn't necessarily be visible on the outside. What would that kind of thing do? And then you can, in your own mind, you can blow it up from there. Forget something as mundane as sports. Imagine all kinds of elements of human society. What would happen if people can just radically alter themselves and make themselves better in every physical way versus those who can't do that? Okay. Another thing that I think sometimes we leave out in this discussion, because we're Christians, we can actually ask these things. The goodness of work. The goal of many bioenhancements is to eliminate difficulty or to create convenience. But the question we ought to ask, is it ever better to work hard for something rather than to have it easy? So, think about this, okay? We're in a school. You could have technology now write your paper for you. I mean, we might kick you out if you do that, but you could conceptually have. In fact, I have students do this regularly, and we report them for this. Why? Why is that a bad thing? Okay, I have my computer write a document, not write a document for me. I have a computer spell out words for me that I don't want to write by hand. What's the difference between doing that and having the computer just write all the words for me, rather than me typing them? It's because there's a goodness to work. The scriptures tell us that work is good. Adam is created to work the ground before he sins. There's a certain goodness to work. And if we are constantly focused on making life easier by removing work and removing work and removing work, we actually start to get into this weird space of redefining what the purpose of humans are for. What are humans here to do? Okay? And then here's a big one. Eternal life in a world of sin. So transhumanism largely rejects the concept of sin, but because one of their goals is to eventually make it so that people can live forever, or at least continually sort of re-download themselves, imagine a world in which Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, and Che Guevara were able to keep downloading themselves forever into new bodies. So Hitler, when he gets on the precipice of dying, just uploads his mind and then downloads himself later into a new body. And no matter how many times you kill him, he keeps coming back. Or Joseph Stalin, or Che Guevara. Now, here's another hard one. Imagine you. One of the mercies that God gives us as humans is that we die. Because you as a sinful thing make poor decisions. I as a sinful thing make poor decisions. Imagine you have an eternal amount, well, not eternal, but let's just pretend you have a nearly unending amount of time to just keep sinning. There's actually some element of God's grace in that he only gives us a certain amount of time to be a sinful individual before, by his grace, he takes us and sanctifies us, and brings us and prepares us for the life yet to come. Okay? Imagine if you've got radically sinful individuals who don't experience that, who just keep going and keep going and keep going, driving further and further and further into malice. Again, this doesn't necessarily defeat this movement, but it's a question we ought to ask. Is it really good to allow such a kind of thing to occur? Okay, there's also the goodness of the body. For transhumanists, your body is largely a problem to be overcome and defeated. Now again, my body has aches and pains and things like that, but it's a good thing. God designed human physical bodies for a reason. Okay, and a good question that we want to ask as Christians is, can transhumanism make sense of what it means to be an image bearer? What does it mean to bear the image of God? Not that they're completely not compatible, but what does it mean if I'm just supposed to destroy the sort of body that I live in? When God looked at Adam and said, that thing bears my image as it is, how does this sort of understanding of reality answer that question? Okay? Here's some philosophical and theological thoughts on this. Okay? Just to point out, transhumanism is largely incompatible with the Christian faith. Okay? While there are some aspects of bioenhancement that may be acceptable, the movement's goals cannot be reconciled with Christian understandings of things like creation, anthropology, soteriology, hamartiology, and eschatology, all the ologies. Okay? Creation problems. So God created the body as a good thing. Mentioned that briefly. God looked at Adam, the physical body. God looked at Eve, the physical body, and said, it's good. That's the way I, as the creator of reality, want it. So when we think about this view and the body being a bad thing, we have a disconnect between God looking at the body and saying it's good versus transhumanism looking at the body and saying it's a problem to be overcome. Okay? We also want to point out that humans are not radically autonomous. We are subject to God's created order. So while we have an individualism about us, where you're an individual unit of thing, you're ultimately not autonomous. You cannot break God's rules for reality. You don't get to make those decisions. We live in a world in which the parameters of existence were defined for us by the Creator. So we live in that space. We are not actually autonomous in this sense. We live under God's rules. We live in His world. God created humans to work His good work. And so while this world has been marred by sin, we can't redefine the world to fit our notions of convenience. We want to live in the world as God has designed it, which includes things like the goodness of work, which includes things like the goodness of the body. This is how the world has been defined for us. We as Christians want to say, even if we don't love it, even if we would wish things were different in some way, this is how God has set it out for us. And we need to do the hard work of conforming to God's understandings of reality rather than our own. Anthropological problems. So transhumanism requires physicalism, which is largely a minority position in Christian thought. There are Christian physicalists, but they're a minority position, mostly because physicalism makes personal identity reducible to brain chemistry. And the majority of Christian positions require some kind of body-soul combination. And because I'm the one standing up here and lecturing, it's obviously correct that hylomorphism is the correct combination of body and soul. That's just true because Thomas was right. And if you disagree with me, you can do that later. But right now I'm talking, so I'm going to say it's true. Okay. You might know the word soteriology, that's salvation. Hamartiology is the doctrine of sin. So what does it mean for something to be sinful? Okay. Transhumanism largely ignores the problem of sin. It's just not a concern for them because they don't have any kind of doctrine of sin. So that's a problem. It seeks to fix humans by fixing the body. So again, the goal of transhumanism is to say your body's the problem. Your body's going to die. It's got aches and ailments. We just want to be able to get rid of all that stuff. And once we can finally overcome some of these problems, we've solved the problems of humanity. Excuse me. It assumes what we might call a radical goodness in humans. Now, anybody know Latin? Why would you? I'm a nerd. Radical doesn't mean on the fringes. We often use it to mean that, to make that distinction now, but radical actually means basic. It's most foundational. So to say something, people probably don't actually mean this when they say it, but to say something like a radical Muslim would actually be to say, if you're using the words in their proper sense, is to say somebody who is at their core, at their most basic, doing the things that Muslims do. Again, I don't think that's the way that people intend the word. If you were to say radical Christian, you wouldn't be someone who was like on fire for Jesus, being passionate. You would be someone who was orthodox, which is, it's just less fun to say that, I suppose. So assumes a radical goodness in humans. What this means is they assume at the most basic level humans are just good. They're morally good things. And so they're not concerned with, if we just give humans unlimited technology and allow them to kind of continue on forever, what would the problem be? Because humans are largely good. So if we just kind of fix their problems with their broken bodies and things like that, if we just fix the fact, like if you can't die, then resources don't matter that much. If you starve to death, that's not a problem. We can just download you to a new body. We can just kind of take you and put you somewhere else. It assumes that by fixing these sort of body problems, we will eventually solve the rest of human societal problems. And then eschatological problems. Eschatology is the study of last things. Sometimes we say end times. The study, the eschatological problems would be that the end of humanity is to become more than human. In a Christian view of the world, we might say that the end of humanity is to become more human, more than human, but really what we mean in Christian circles is the end of humanity is not to become more than human, but to become more human. Jesus is the most human thing. When you look at the resurrected Christ is just definitionally a human. That is the standard of what a human is. We're all downgraded a shift here because we've been marred by sin. Our image has been broken in some way. And so the goal of Christian eschatology is to become more like Christ. That's the doctrine of sanctification. I'm becoming more like Christ, who is the proper human. And this isn't just a moralism to say like, well, I want to do the things Christ did because he was human. This is to say like Christ is ontologically more of what a human is supposed to be. Our goal is to be more like that. This is to become more than human because humans are ultimately problematic things. You happen to currently be the most functional thing available, but if we can fix your functions through the use of technology, we'll have eventually created the post-human, and therefore we don't need to worry about these sort of broken human things that have problems, that get old. We don't need to worry about that anymore because we've created something more than human. And so we fix human problems by solving death through bodily consciousness transfer. In short, transhumanist movement is incompatible with Christianity. So whatever we think about it, it's not a view that can be harmonized with Christianity. It is a separate view of reality to a Christian view of the world. And so in this way, this is why I said this is sort of a progressive view of the world, and if we call Christianity a conservative view of the world, setting aside modern political definitions, okay, they're at odds with each other. Okay? This is sort of developed as almost a technological counter worldview, and it's essentially a quest to be like God. It's a quest to be able to name and define reality as you see fit, and to be able to conquer the problem of death. It's almost too easy to see it as a separate worldview, or as a counter worldview, because it's like it does all the things that God does in Christianity. It's quite nice and poetic for us. So some short philosophical responses, and we'll take some time for questions. Here's a point of note. Humans are capable of introspection, computers are not. So these are sort of counter-arguments to transhumanism. You're capable of thinking about yourself. Despite what ChatGPT might have you think, it doesn't actually think. ChatGPT provides text